Hey, Cougar family. Welcome to Season 1 of the CougsFirst podcast, your one-stop business network, a podcast all about life, business, and the best college in the world, Washington State University. Join us each episode to hear stories from your favorite Cougs, interviewed by yours truly, Kelsey Knutson, class of 2012. We're so glad you're here, and we can't wait to dive into this week's conversation. So grab a cup of coffee, crack open that beer, or pour a glass of wine, and let's kick off another episode of the CougsFirst podcast. All right, Cougs, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today, buckle up, because I am joined by Brea, who not only was a student body president at her time at WSU, she also has a really amazing story where she's built this business, honestly, out of a place of experience and things that she's gone through personally in her career. And now she's on this mission to really disrupt the traditional work environment, and traditional in a lot of senses, right? Like how we see time, how we break up roles and responsibilities. What does it take to have an awesome company culture? So whether you work for a company and you're just working on building your career, or you're a business owner yourself and you want to hire really awesome people who really buy in and contribute to this amazing business that you have, I think there's going to be something really valuable for here in this episode for you to take and run with. So Brea, first things first, let's start with baby Brea. Not like in the womb, but like, how did you end up at WSU? Walk us through that journey of how you decided that was the college for you.
Oh, awesome, Kelsey. Well, I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm so happy to be spending time with Cougs. Like, that just feels like a homecoming whenever I get to be in community with this group. I will admit that I was not like, WSU was not really my plan. That wasn't really the agenda for me. I was actually enrolled to go to Seattle U. I was like, my plan was to be a lawyer. I was going to play fast pitch. I had this whole thing planned out. And my mom said, why don't you just go take a look at WSU? I had never been to the Palouse. I grew up in a very urban environment. And so I said, all right, I'll go check it out. And honestly, just driving to Pullman and over those hills and this little Oz showed up out of nowhere. I was completely enchanted. And then I met the students there and I was sold. I mean, I was instantly sold. And so I withdrew my application from the other school and luckily got into Wazoo and really felt like I made the right choice for my life. So I don't know if that was like baby Brea. That wasn't really the plan. I didn't even know if I was going to go to college. I was the first in my family to graduate from college. So WSU was just a really beautiful place to go explore.
Oh, totally. And your story of how you became class president is so crazy. So you have to tell that, but also for those listening, that's such a small, tiny amount of people who get that experience in school. So I'm excited to just kind of pull back the curtain and talk through that experience. So one, how'd you get there? How did that become your role at WSU?
Well, I wasn't a great student, Kelsey. That's the truth.
Knowing you, that doesn't compute in my brain, by the way. I just want you to know that.
I wasn't all that interested in school. Okay, well, so the truth is, in high school, I went to a new high school. I transferred from a public school to a private high school, and I didn't know anybody. So I ran for student government to try to get to know people in high school. And I figured that was kind of the end of it. I was going to go to college and that wasn't going to be a thing. But when I went to a live, I met the current student body president, Jesse Keene at the time, and he presented at a live and was talking about ways to get involved. And I found myself in the chair, jittering, I just felt pulled to want to do that. And so after that presentation was over, I marched up to him and I said, "Hi, Jesse, I'm Brea, and I want to have your job one day." And he's like, "Whoa, hey, you haven't even started school here yet." And so that was embarrassing. And then a total creep, I found out that his vice president, Annie Brown, was in a sorority. And I was like, what is this whole sorority thing about? Perhaps that would be something I should consider. And so I found out what sorority she was in, and then I joined that sorority. So I got real interested in how I could sort of build a 4-year approach to becoming student body president. And I knew women weren't really represented in that office often. Annie was a beautiful vice president that set a really high standard, but I didn't see women holding that role much. And so I knew it was going to be quite an effort to try to get there over the course of 3 years and prepare for a big campaign to head into that my senior year.
Do you think most students come into college with that goal. Like you have to kind of decide you're going to ramp up for the next 3 years to apply for that kind of role. So is that pretty normal for people to have their sights set that far down, or no?
No, I think you can make that choice later on. But I mean, let me give you an example. I just didn't want any photos taken that shouldn't show up later in life. Like there are just choices like that you make. And then I decided to get involved with student government before that. So I joined our student senate because you may not know, but the student government is run just like the federal government. We have a 3-branch system. There are elected officials. There are appointed positions as well. It's in fact where I met Tony Poston of CougsFirst, and so built some really awesome relationships through my time leading up to a campaign for president. But certainly you don't need to go quite that fully committed if that's not your path.
But it worked for you.
It did. I think people knew in advance, I was running. So it helped kind of create some momentum and some energy and maybe some fear, I don't know, from other people. So I think it helped me for sure to be as prepared and mindful about that objective as I could be.
And even if it hadn't, what a cool experience to really just fully go for it and take risk like that, and also not be afraid to approach people who are further down the road than you.
Yeah, it impacted the way I thought about a lot of decisions. One example is, so I met my husband at a frat party sophomore year. He wasn't my husband then, of course. And we went out to our first date at the Daily Grind. We were playing some board games.
Might have been working.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, you might have been there. And Andrew, I just said, hey, you got to understand this about me. My plan is to run for student vice president, in a year or two. And, I need to know if you're on board with that or not. That's how my dating life went, which is why I didn't date much. And he was like, that sounds awesome. And I'd love to participate with you. And how can I support you? And now we just celebrated 15 years of marriage, and our relationship's still very similar, even today. So anyway, the early roots of this thing go back a ways.
That's so cool. And for people listening who went to WSU, what are some just unknowns about being student government, let alone president? Maybe things that people are misconstrued or don't realize that you're doing behind the scenes.
Sure. So it's actually, there's a salary that goes with it. In fact, WSU has one of the highest salaries in the country for this position. It's just how it was built. And so that actually paid for my last year of school there, which you honestly, it is a full-time job. You're working at least 40 hours a week there's presidential responsibilities. You sit on at least 15 decision-making committees across the school. You are an honorary member of the Board of Regents. You have about $1 million to $1.5 million worth of budget that you have to allocate across student associations and organizations. During my time there, the big initiative that we worked on was we renovated the Cub. And so I was, for good or bad, known as the person who installed the largest student-initiated state fee in state history for us to go and renovate the Cub. Other presidents are known for their support of athletics or for diversity and inclusion initiatives. That was also a big part of our time there. So each person sort of has a passion that they want to champion. And that was mine, is that I wanted us to have sort of a living room for us to all be able to congregate at and have a space that was really memorable for our students. And that was my priority.
And as someone who helped pay for it, but also got to enjoy that, thank you.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Just being in Pullman and where it's located, it just makes sense as a hub. But yeah, that upgrade was needed.
It was needed. Now, we can debate all day of why students had to pay for that and not our legislator. We tried, I promise you that. But fair enough. Yeah, we got there. So it was a very unique experience for sure, Kelsey. And I'm really grateful for the students that they believed in me, and that was I felt like I was in the right place at the right time doing that job. Mm-hmm. And it led to so much more, and a really deep appreciation for my time at WSU.
CougsFirst is your one-stop business network. Looking for a new bank or insurance? Think CougsFirst. Buying a new car? Think CougsFirst. Hiring a Coug? Think CougsFirst. Need a mentor? You guessed it. Think CougsFirst. What makes WSU great is Cougs supporting Cougs, and they are in every business.
And we'll take your call. Google it at CougsFirst.org. And as always, go Cougs.
That's how unique. What lessons did you learn in your experience in that role that you apply to the stuff you do now?
Ooh, a lot of humility, a lot of mistakes. What's interesting too, because WSU is its own microcosm of a community, right? There is free press. So I had journalists following me around. I had dissenters. This was, kind of like early digital time. So there was like anti-Brea blog posters. And so that was kind of wild. And then really uniting a lot of people behind a shared mission. I mean, this is the early indications of what we're going to be when we grow up. And so getting to sort of test myself as an advocate in these, like in a safe setting, really was transformation for me. I didn't know that at the time. And even lately, in the last sort of few years, I've really harkened back to that time I spent there, especially when it relates to inclusion and advocacy, which is a big part of my work now. I didn't yet know how many seeds I was planting during my time there. And it certainly led me to a lot more resilience later in life, because if you can really get through that experience with your head held high, then you can really go into the world sort of ready to face a lot, because a lot you face a lot, and you're responsible for a lot. There's a lot of power associated with that role. So you just have to think about that and like how you want to steward that work.
That's so cool. So to the student listening who maybe didn't meet you at Alive, but is interested in running or being involved to some capacity at the university, what advice would you give to that person?
I think it's coalition building. It is thinking about who are your allies, who are the folks. Like, I mean, I had hundreds of people putting flyers on windshields, right? Like, I mean, there are people that you will need to believe in you. And so it takes a lot of inner sort of strength and confidence to ask people for help. But if you're able to do that and kind of build this coalition around your movement, that is what galvanizes folks to come along. Our URL, you always have like a campaign and everyone's got like a little shtick, and ours was aswsyu.com. That was our URL, because our whole concept was like, it's about you, like, let us represent you. And so there will be a unifying message that you want to bring, and finding that early will help build that coalition for sure. And my encouragement is to do it. Like there's no one I would say, like, do not go for it. You absolutely should go and take the swing, because you'll just learn so much no matter what.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably took everything you learned in classes and the Greek system to a whole nother level that you were able to pull and apply to your career now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Because obviously I know how this story ends. I know what you're doing now. The listeners may not, but is that something that was always on your heart, or no?
I think I probably knew deep down that was coming for me, but I didn't know in what capacity. When I was a student, I was a PR major, marketing minor. So I sort of blended liberal arts with very light touch into business, because I was afraid of stats and some of the more analytical pieces of the business class. Although now those are ones that I absolutely gobble up and wish I would have spent more time on.
Yeah, I know, right? Yes. I feel like that always happens though.
Yes. So I was really heavy into sort of like the liberal arts side and communication side of the world. And I think that, my goal as I graduated, as I said, I want to work in an enterprise. Like I knew I wanted to go into, my goal was either Microsoft, Nordstrom, or Starbucks. And I said, I will do any job you want me to do as long as I can land in one of those enterprises, because I really wanted a strong foundation to start a career from. So I didn't go straight into entrepreneurship, but it just kind of pulled at me. No matter what I did, it called me into it. So, and I think, my dad was an entrepreneur. My mom was a hustler. Even my grandparents were, I would consider, entrepreneurs. So I do think it's kind of in my blood.
Yeah. So let's just go there. Let's tell the people how you graduate. Obviously, you're so strategic with running for office. So I imagine you're very laser focused for these corporations you're applying to. So literally, where did you interview? What did that process look like? And then what was that first job that you landed?
Sure. I cast a wide net. I had a giant spreadsheet of all these folks I had met and rooms I had been in. And of course, I was very diligent about networking and following up with those folks and ensuring my resume looked great. And I knew how to pitch myself and all that. So that's kind of the homework that I did. And like I said, I was very focused on those 3 firms, but I didn't know if I was going to get in. And so I applied for lots of small ad agencies and sales gigs, and I ended up getting a couple of those offers. But I remember I actually sat on an offer, and I just said, "Hey, can I wait to decide?" Because I wanted to see if I could still land one of these gigs. My mom was like, "You can't do that," and I was like, "Well, why not?" And they let me. They sat on it for 3 months, and then while I waited, and then eventually spring break of senior year, I got an interview at Microsoft and went through that very rigorous process, but somehow landed a gig there, and so I graduated and I went straight into this very big job at Microsoft, which they did such a nice job placing me within their community because they had an organization focused on selling into education, higher ed. And so I had a lot of empathy for that audience. And then we were building coalitions. So we were starting to build consortia organizations and influence organizations to sell Microsoft products across education. So it's such a good bridge for me to take sort of some industry knowledge and turn it into something in tech, which I had no business being in, because I knew nothing about technology truly. And so they just did a really nice job of placing me in. And then, of course, I was hired by a Coug. So that made it even better. Like, that's how it all worked.
Hire each other. That's why we have CougsFirst, first of all. And you have 2 Coug business owners right here, right now. Don't be afraid to reach out, even if it doesn't turn into a job. Like, that's what's so cool about this community. And I just think maybe people feel like they need a little bit of permission to do that. It worked for you multiple times. You have multiple stories of how it's worked for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cougs have shown up for me over and over and over again, for sure. This is a deeply entrenched and loyal network that I will continue to promote and support and ask of whenever I need.
Yeah, I love that so much. And then we got to bring it up to speed, which you're obviously not at Microsoft anymore. So what happened, Brea?
Sure. I spent about 4 years as an FTE at Microsoft, but did feel this call to entrepreneurship. My plan was, I'm going to be a corporate vice president one day. Like, I'm going to work my way up this corporate ladder. But just something in my gut said, that's not the right move for you. And I will share with you this specific story. I was considering whether I was going to get my MBA. And for folks who do that, like that path makes a lot of sense for many people. But I went and chatted with a WSU alum who I really trusted as a mentor. And I said I was considering this, but I was also considering entrepreneurship. And he said, what I would recommend is that if you can have someone pay you to learn on the job, it's a way better return on investment than if you were to go get an MBA. Now, for my WSU MBA and online MBA folks, like, that's not your marketing message. I understand. But for me, it was the right message at the right time, because it was kind of the permission I needed to just go and fail fast.
You knew in your gut, right? It's just like you needed that person to like really help you tap in back to that.
Yeah, for sure. And so I found this lovely victim who was willing to bet on me, and I was I was the first employee at this company. And so we sort of co-founded it together. It was a staffing firm. And it was an amazing experience because I was on like irs.gov, like, how do I pay taxes and what's a payroll system? And I set in place a 401k and a match, and we did all sorts of procurement work. And so I really just set up a business from scratch. I took them from about $0 to $16 million, about 120 employees. And so it was just a wild ride in 4 years. And then I felt pulled to do other things. I wanted to go explore other business models. And so I went and ran a digital marketing agency, a very different experience because you've got a different kind of staffing model, different talent model. And then I felt really interested in startups. So I went and joined a very well-funded startup, very stable. I think I was employee like 450. And that is where my husband and I decided it was time to start a family. So I got knocked up and proceeded to work with that team until I was 7 months pregnant, when they did a reduction in force. And so I was laid off in my 3rd trimester. And Kelsey, I mean, that's really when all of my career planning stopped. I was on this path. I had this kind of momentum going. And here I was, like sort of literally waddling down the street, and no one would hire me. Mm. And so I didn't know what to do. I'm the breadwinner in my family, and I had a baby nearly on the way and no medical benefits to speak of. And so the only thing I could do at that time is I called a few folks and I said, like, will you at least hire me as a freelancer? Like, can I at least like consult to you 5 or 10 hours a week? Is there any business challenge that I can solve for you? And I got a few yeses. And so I started billing myself out as a consultant, which I had never done before. And I had my baby. And so I self-funded my maternity leave with him. And when I got back from that, when I finished that, I said, I just want to work part-time. I just want to like learn how to be a mom and also contribute at work. And I couldn't find a job in corporate America that allowed me the flexibility I needed as a new caretaker and as a pretty senior level contributor. And so this is when I felt like there's a market here. There's a need here. There's people who are like me that have this need. And so I felt pulled and called to go and do this work and build a business around that. And so I now own and run a business called Lions and Tigers. We are an agency that does culture design work and also professional services. So we bring consultants into the workforce. We keep them in that would otherwise opt out or be pushed out because of the way that our models have been built. And based on what we learn, we help organizations modernize the way that they work. And so now I'm on new stages and having different conversations than I thought I ever would have because of what has happened to me and then what has happened to thousands of people I have talked to since then. So we feel pretty pulled towards changing the way that we all work.
And you kind of said it without saying it, which is it's not just moms. It's people who are maybe taking care of their parents or maybe husbands of wives who maybe want more of a flexible. So this need applies to a wider range than I think people just assume right off the bat. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of use cases for it. I've got one gal who lives and works out of her Airstream trailer, and she just sort of parks and jumps in, and she's a really gifted PM. She does project management work from her trailer. I have a sitting senator who sits in Olympia for part of his time, and then part of his time he works with me and does big analytics work. So there's many use cases where people need this flexibility. Here's what's interesting, Kelsey. I started this thing thinking I was just going to get some moms some jobs. But what's happened when you look at talent trends is that caretakers, people that identify as needing to do caretaking post-COVID, that number is probably, that community is probably the largest community within your worker population that you have. It's estimated that more than 75% of your workers identify as a caretaker. And with the aging population, that number is only going to increase. And so although I started this place as an advocate for moms, what we know is that if we broaden that definition, if we think about the folks in your organization who are looking after brothers and sisters and people who are sick or themselves as caretakers, we realize we might actually capture the largest piece of your population. And if we solve the working model for caretakers, we can then solve it for everyone.
What makes WSU great? Cougs support Cougs, and they are in every business and want to give you a good deal. Looking for a new bank or insurance? Think CougsFirst. Selling your house? Think CougsFirst. Need to plan a party? Pick a venue or set your menu? Think CougsFirst. Did we make our point? Start to Google it at CougsFirst.org. And as always, go Cougs!
Why? I'm like, why would a business be opposed to implementing something like that? Like some bigger businesses, and when you're having these conversations and going after bigger and bigger clients, what's the biggest kind of apprehension that they have?
There's a few. One, it's hard.
Yeah.
So change is hard. Thinking about this in the traditional sense, we have a very specific model of work. We have a 5-day work week, 9 to 5. Traditionally, that is how working hours are done. So that's just one way that we've always sort of done it. Two is that folks don't necessarily know that they need to change. I think that there's fear within leaders that there is something happening. They're seeing attrition go up. They're seeing employee morale go down. They're seeing economic pressure and volatility, and they're not sure which decision to make next. And so this one feels like it's a bet against other bets that they have to make. So they're just calculating a big chessboard. So there's that. And then lastly, there's, as you get into bigger and bigger organizations, there's complexity with how we think about headcount from a finance perspective, like how we actually code the headcount. And that is very dependent on geography, on the global nature of an organization, and whether they would consider, like, is Kelsey as a half-time employee the same on my P&L as a full-time Kelsey, and what's the ROI of those models? So it's just very complicated. So I empathize with leaders who have to make those decisions. And also, I run a very big and profitable organization based on this model. So think that I can help them and coach them through some of the decisions we've made to make that easier.
And what do you think works? Like, if you were to try to sum it down to a couple core pieces, thinking of your team, clients you've worked with, where are people able to find this kind of hybrid model and have the most success?
It starts with listening. And I don't mean that to be trite. I mean that because it's actually really hard to go through and listen to the sentiment of your team. They are often giving you the answer. And so we would never go in and approach an organization with a solution without going through a really thorough listening experience. And so a lot of times we see employee surveys or pulse surveys where we're getting some data. They're saying things like work-life balance is off, or, my scope is out of whack, or I have needs that are unaddressed through our traditional benefits models. And so when we see those indicators, that's what we use as basically creating a roadmap. Now, when trouble starts to creep in, it's when we spot treat things, when we look at an individual and we try to just solve something for them, because the culture is not built in a way that supports it. And so there'll be animosity built against those specific use cases. But what we do know is that when we come in and we build cultures of inclusion, cultures of belonging, where people are united under a shared mission, and then the agreements are fair across everybody, then we know that we can see that buy-in happen and those systems can start to change. It doesn't happen overnight. It does require commitment. And there's like some really interesting stories you can look at where this is happening. There's an organization I follow, and they do something really simple. They have a Slack channel, and on one of their Slack options, if they want to go offline, they have a little heart that they use, and that heart indicates that there's someone and they're off caretaking. So they're not working, they're not off, they're caretaking. And in that moment, everyone understands that they're only looking for urgent communications. There's nothing that is not time sensitive that should go to them. Things like that are little indicators in cultures that are really accessible to every organization to say, like, what matters to us? And more, I'm inspired by leaders who say things like impact matters, hours don't matter. And those are the kinds of leaders I want to get behind and prop up, because I know that their organization is going to attract and retain really amazing talent.
Absolutely. And you may not even see all of the connections, but I do, which is WSU as a whole has a very specific culture. Obviously, it extends beyond everyone's 4, maybe 5 years there. But also your journey in running for president, you got people to buy in and into this movement of you and help support you. And now you're doing this with your own business. So to the person who maybe doesn't realize that's something they get to do as an entrepreneur or leader, what have you learned in bringing people together to buy into something like that and really just feel included and help push a movement or a business forward in that way?
It's a big question. I think when I look back, it's been really helpful to me to be clear about my values. And values can get overused, and I don't mean to just be sort of like a coffee cup answer to you. But the values that I have really centralized on have been very consistent across every decision I've made, every career move I've made, every person I've tried to attract. And they're those now that I have used to install this business. They are the foundation of the business that I have built today, which is completely the benefactor of all of the learnings I've had up until now. Literally, I'm giving everything I have at this one business. And so those values have been really, really clear and true. They are impact, community, stewardship, and courage. And I come back to those over and over and over again, and I use them to filter my decisions, who I hire. When I talk about culture fit and screening people into the culture, it is because they match and agree that those are the values by which we all want to operate. And they're who I say yes to from a client perspective too. And so having that framework as the foundation has allowed me, I think, to move further and faster because I haven't had to go back and retrace that and recreate the wheel every time.
That is such a good answer and so true. And I think WSU, and most of the time it's some kind of feeling, and it's hard to even describe how we felt in that moment, but there was some kind of feeling that happened that pushed us to take that next step. And what you're saying is you basically created a filter based off of that now you can run things through. And I think that's awesome. And to the people listening, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're a business owner or not, I think once you are aware of your values for yourself, that feeling you had in deciding to go to WSU, how can you also tap back into that when you're faced with decisions, whether it's starting a business, growing your team, whatever that it may be?
Yeah. And the other thing I would say too, Kelsey, I talk to a lot of folks who I would consider questioning themselves. And people come across my desk all the time and say, like, how do I do it? Or how do you do it? Or how can it be possible? That question comes to me a lot. And so often it's because folks truly aren't seeing themselves in the way that others see them. There's a disconnect. There's a cognitive disconnect between the sort of confidence needed to ask for the life that you're interested in leading compared to what you've been told to accept. And I know there's a lot to that. There really is. Right. And that's been a lot of unlearning for me, a lot of very specific conversations I've had with people who I trust and value to go through a self-discovery and also to understand my role in the broader society. And I think too, if people are going through that in the mucky muck and trying to figure out where they're headed, really turning inward and thinking about the true value that you can have through service really can transform some of that and shortcut you through some of those imposter syndrome moments or crisis of confidence moments that we all face.
Well, and so often it's really not about the what or the how or the specific steps taken. It really starts with that belief in yourself. I mean, you said it, you had to get people to believe and support you, which started with you had to believe in you.
Sure. Yeah. And there's not always models ahead of you. I didn't have a model of a college graduate ahead of me. I didn't have a model of a female president ahead of me. Those weren't things I saw, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let that be the case for the folks that came behind. So what is it what is that for you in your life that you want to ensure is different for the folks that come behind you?
I could talk to you all day, but we have to end here and we have to end with some fun. So I have 3 just quick, casual questions for you. Are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
Okay. First thing, if we were to get a drink in Pullman right now, where would we go?
Oh, Rico's for sure. For sure. Mostly because I love popcorn and also because my husband used to do open mic nights there. So I would watch him learn guitar in front of an audience.
That's amazing. And promise I have not had that answer yet. Love that. Shout out to the husband. Okay. Number 2, if we were to go to one football game this season, and again, it could be one we've already played or one moving forward, what game would that be?
Well, we do have tickets for Apple Cup. So there is a high chance that I'll be there with 1, 2, or 3 children. I'm not sure yet. But actually, no, what's funny is my husband, as long as we've been together, he has never been to an Apple Cup. So this is his year. We're going to do it for him.
Well, prepare him by telling him not to make any bets on anything because regardless of how season's gone, Apple Cup is always its own experience.
It is.
Yes. I agree. I love that though. And then the last question, if you were to describe your time at WSU in one word, what would that word be?
Transformative.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Great answer. Where can people find more of you? I mean, you have your business, but also you are definitely worth a LinkedIn follow because you're up to some cool stuff. You're constantly growing and evolving. So where can people find some more?
Yeah, I love to be on LinkedIn. That's probably my preferred platform. So I'm Brea Starmer on LinkedIn. The company is Lions and Tigers. Subtle, I know. And we're pretty active, Lions and Tigers, on Instagram and Twitter and all those spaces. So come and find us.
Perfect. We have all of that information in the show notes. And Cougs listening, I hope this was your permission slip to go after it. And whether you needed some additional support or nuggets around business, career, anything, I'm hoping you walked away with some extra love today in this episode. So Brea, thank you so much for your heart and your expertise. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kelsey. Go Cougs.
Go Cougs.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for hanging out with us on the CougsFirst podcast. We hope you leave feeling inspired, entertained, and encouraged to support yet another awesome Cougar-owned business. If you like what you heard, do us a huge favor and leave a review for the CougsFirst podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on the latest episodes, and please share this podcast with your fellow Cougs. And remember to thank CougsFirst for all of your products and services. But until the next episode, let's end it with a good old-fashioned Go Cougs!